Welcome back to another Live Each Day with Purpose podcast. I am really excited about this episode. It's actually very dear to my heart because the topic is about health and wellness, in particular in regards to Alzheimer's and dementia. I actually want to introduce you to my guest, Jenna Anderson. Jenna is a visionary leader with over 2 decades of experience driving growth and innovation in the health and wellness sectors. As the CEO of Kihealth, and we're going to talk a lot about Kihealth, Jenna spearheads the company's mission to revolutionize diagnostics through cutting edge technology, enabling earlier detection and intervention for chronic diseases. Under her leadership, KeyHealth is pioneering advancements in beta cell diagnostics, bringing transformative solutions to both clinical and consumer markets. Prior to her role at KeyHealth, Jenna holds a Bachelor of Science in Public Relations and Business from the University of Florida. And her passion for innovation and business strategy has led her to mentor and advise numerous organizations in the health tech space. A frequent keynote speaker, Jenna is also recognized for her contributions to healthcare innovation within the companies she leads. Jenna, welcome.
Thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. And I actually want to dedicate this episode to Jenna's mom, Prudence, who started Key Health because of your mom. And we're going to get into that because I think that's a powerful story that everybody needs to hear. And I also want to dedicate it to my papa, who also suffered from Alzheimer's, and ultimately that took his life as it took your mom's. So tell me, how did Key Health get started, and tell me about your mom and her story.
Yeah, no. So I have had the pleasure of working in healthcare my whole career. Now, oh my gosh, at over 20 years, aging myself. But I've worked on all sides of the industry. I started out actually in advertising on Madison Avenue, and that's where it was really helping healthcare brands tell their story. And then transitioned in-house at big organizations, Allergan, AbbVie, working predominantly on the product, or what I call the treatment, the therapeutic side, so post-diagnosis. And after my mother was diagnosed with Alzheimer's, very young. So my mother was diagnosed with a very rare form of Alzheimer's called frontal lobe dementia, primary progressive aphasia. It's the same type of dementia that Bruce Willis has as a good kind of point of direction. But she was diagnosed at 50, which is incredibly young. I mean, that's 7 years from where I am right now. And she likely had symptoms at my age. In her early 40s, was already developing the disease. And through that journey, we went everywhere. I got her in to see the doctor who named primary progressive aphasia, discovered it. And inherently, every avenue we took from Mayo to Chicago was a dead end. You know, you encounter these brilliant minds that are studying this disease, and what they all tell you is watch her die slowly, prepare yourself. There was no hope. And you hear that, pretty frequently when you talk to family members that are dealing with loved ones having Alzheimer's or dementia. There's no hope. People essentially just are resigned to their fate. And that wasn't good enough for me. I said, I'm not going to watch my mother at 50 years old slowly die from a disease and just give up. And so we went down a lot of paths. I mean, we've tried what everybody would call fringe medicine, to the nth degree, from nasally inhaled insulin to supplements to red light therapy to honestly going over the border to Mexico and doing stem cell infusions. And it did dramatically extend her life and her quality of life. But the key thing that was missing was we didn't catch it early. I truly believe that Alzheimer's is preventable, but I believe it's only preventable if you identify it early enough to change course. And if I knew now what I knew then, my mother might honestly still be alive, but I just didn't know. We didn't understand what was the underlying cause of the disease. We didn't understand, the health implications that, she was potentially suffering from. And so we made it our mission, both my brother and I, to really focus the back half of our career on prevention. But more importantly, like root cause identification. You talk to people all the time, and we deal so much in symptom management. That's just how our healthcare system is geared. We want the quick fix. We're a society of immediate gratification. If you have a headache, what do? You pop an aspirin or a Tylenol or an ibuprofen. You don't sit for a moment and go, well, why do I have a headache?
Mhm.
Am I dehydrated? Am I tired? Am I overly stressed? Am I going through caffeine withdrawal? Like, get to the why. And that is the case in almost every interaction we have with medical professionals, with how we manage our care. The running joke is we're all taking supplements. We don't know if we need them or if they work.
Mhm.
I use this analogy a lot, even with pharmacists. I say, if you were to take your car into the shop because it wasn't running, would the mechanic look at it and tell you what was wrong without looking under the hood, without going and determining where the problem lies? They wouldn't. But we do that with our body all the time. We don't look under the hood. We don't determine how our body's performing on the inside to determine why we're feeling the way we do on the outside. And so everything we do is focused on root cause care, root cause understanding. We named our company Key Health. Key, Ki, means the source within. So all of our diagnostics are focused on finding the source of the problem so that you can actually intervene earlier and hopefully never get sick.
I love that. And I hate that it took, what your mom went through for this to come about. But I know that from that, this is going to help so many people that otherwise wouldn't have had that help or that hope. So you talked about the root cause and how so many people don't focus on the root cause, and it's just not how our health system works. So let's kind of go into that a little bit more of I loved what you said about looking under the hood. I think I've even been guilty of I have a headache and I'm popping ibuprofen.
Yeah.
It's a quick fix. It's kind of what you grew up knowing of take this. Your stomach's upset. Take a Tums. Problem can kind of linger. It might show up in a couple of months. And how often do we hear stories of people being misdiagnosed or
Mm-hmm.
not being diagnosed and being turned away by doctors saying it's nothing, just go home, just take this, and then end up being cancer, end up being something else. And your brother and I had spoken a little bit about root causes and even more so about how everything's interconnected, which was fascinating to me. And I don't think a lot of people see the interconnection. So can you kind of go through that? Because my grandpa had Alzheimer's, but he also had diabetes and he also
Mm-hmm.
had heart disease. And after his quadruple bypass, he got cancer. And then towards the end of his life, he got cancer again.
Everything is interconnected. We stop listening to our bodies. Like our bodies are so smart. And, I laugh like when something's happening on the outside, it's your body trying to tell you something on the inside that maybe you're just not listening to. Eczema is a great example. If you're having an inflammatory reaction on your skin, you need to know why. Where is there inflammation inside? So you're not just covering up the symptom. Your body's called to you to listen with a cream or an ointment or a steroid, when in actuality, there's something else going on. It could be gut health. It could be a multitude of things. I could get real hokey with you here, but I laugh like if I get allergies, it is my body signaling to me something is wrong. And it will be less than 8 hours that I'll have allergies. But if my nose starts running, my husband knows like I'm stressed out or I'm overtired. And my body's having an inflammatory reaction to something I'm doing to it, and it's giving me a sign that I need to intervene. You know, all in all, most of what we do and how we feel is if you get to the root cause as to why, I use the three horsemen analogy. There's inflammation, poor gut health, and metabolic dysregulation. Those are the three evil horsemen. If you know what your inflammation levels are, if you have an optimized gut and you have good metabolic health, the likelihood is you're not going to get sick. You're not going to get an autoimmune condition. You're not going to develop diseases like Alzheimer's. But the fact is, most people don't know. They don't know, do you have inflammation in your body? They don't know what's going on in their gut, and they're all interlinked. And I think that's really where, from a healthcare system, we need to be thinking, okay, how frequently are you getting blood work done to understand your metabolic health and to understand your inflammation levels? How frequently are you testing your gut to understand that ecosystem and how it's functioning? There are more neurons in our gut than there are in our brain. And we've stopped taking care of our gut and understanding what it needs. Do you have an overabundance of bad bacteria? Is there something going on with your gut lining? Do you have gut inflammation? Do you have a parasite? I'll be honest, I don't think I've ever met a person that knows what's going on in their gut that isn't in the industry and, overly engaged with that side of their health.
Mhm. And I think also it's really interesting is like anytime like mental health or someone's feeling low or even depressed, doctors will try to treat the head. Whereas
Hmm.
the serotonin is mostly in your gut. And then of course, then people have inflammation, as you said, like it just kind of spirals one thing after another. Something that I thought was really interesting when I was talking with Robert, he said in generations of a family, they'll think, well, this person had cancer, so I'm at risk of getting cancer, I'm at risk of being this, I'm at risk of being Alzheimer's. And he said, think of how they're eating, think of how they're living, think of their environment that's not changing.
Not
Yes, sentence.
predestined to get anything. At the end of the day, there was obviously mapping the genome was incredible. It was huge evolution in understanding science in the body. But the one area that got missed was your genetics do not determine your future. They lay the foundation, but you're still in the driver's seat. So to your point, epigenetics, which is becoming a term that, many of us are readily understanding or we're hearing or we're learning about, is really the environmental factors that activate those genes. So how you live, the air quality, do you smoke, do you drink, do you eat, do you exercise? Like all of those factors contribute to whether or not you're going to develop a disease. So, I always say with confidence, my mother died at a very young age of Alzheimer's. I won't get Alzheimer's. I can say that confidently because I am doing all the things environmentally to ensure I don't develop the disease. I'm testing my gut regularly. I'm keeping my inflammation levels low. I'm ensuring I'm metabolically regulated. I get my metabolic numbers done probably at least once a month. Mind you, I'm in the industry, so I'm hyper, into it. But, my HbA1c is a 4. I have a low beta cell score. Like I know my numbers. And I think that's the thing where a lot of people are missing the mark. Do you know your numbers? The most important numbers, which are your metabolic numbers. Do you know your inflammation numbers? Have you tested your gut? Those things are crucial to determining whether or not you're likely to develop a disease.
You had talked about how part of it is getting to the root cause, but also knowing your body and knowing what to do and what not to do, and just different ways to kind of stay on top of it. So, with all of that health and what are you eating, what are you not eating, what are some changes people can make right now that could change the trajectory of their health immediately?
So, one, which is the hardest one, is sleep.
Mm-hmm.
Sleep is crucial. We hear this all the time. It matters.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody's a little different, but most people need between 6 and 8 hours of sleep, but not only just, in the bed, head on the pillow, eyes closed, like quality REM sleep. It is when your body's recovering. If your body doesn't get to recover, it can't function well. So sleep is crucial. Obviously, movement. I laugh. I was not always very good in the movement category. I was blessed with, decent genetics and a good metabolism when I was younger. Now I am active at least 6 days a week. I am doing something for my body. I tell people, though, it's more for my mental health than my physical health. If I can get out and I play pickleball, I'm not an expert on this, but I tell people, I'm like, find something you like to do. So much of us try to do what we think we're supposed to do. Oh, I should go to the gym. I hate the gym. My brother loves the gym. That works for him. It doesn't work for me. So the advice I tell people is figure out what works for you. If you like being outside, if you like walking, if you like competition, like for me, I love pickleball because I can turn my brain off. For a whole hour, I can only think about pickleball. So it's a mental recharge, but it's also I'm physically active, I'm outside, it's social. So it kind of hits all those buckets for me. The next thing is obviously diet. That's very personal. I am actually a big believer in the blood type diet. I think you should eat for your blood type. Mine is Mediterranean, so I am a pescatarian. I don't eat meat. I eat very clean, lots of fruits and vegetables. I'm eating at least seafood once a day. So I'm really having a very balanced diet. And then I supplement where my gaps are, so iron. I don't get enough iron because I'm not eating enough leafy greens and I don't eat meat. So I do take an iron supplement. I am a huge proponent for berberine. I think it's just an incredible supplement. It not only has gut effects, so it's actually really healthy for your gut and propagating good bacteria. They call it nature's GLP-1. It helps you actually process and dispose of sugar more effectively. There's so many benefits to berberine, and it's such an easy thing to take. As you age, things to think about are NAD, glutathione. I'm in my 40s, so my body isn't running like it did in my 20s. But when you think about supplements, that's another thing where it's very personal. I ask you, I'm like, I hate taking pills. I'm like a 5-year-old when it comes to taking pills, so I don't take pills. Everything I do is either going to be liposomal, it's going to be put in a drink, or it's going to be a gummy. I'm not going to mess with pills. And the one other thing I do, and I think most people need, is trace minerals. Trace minerals are incredible. We don't get them in our soil like we should. We've destroyed our soil. You know, thank you, Monsanto. Appreciate that. So, you really want to look at what do you have in your diet? What can you do? In a former life, I worked in the bariatric surgery space. And one of the really good learnings I got from working in that space is behavior change is hard. So if you don't cook, the likelihood is you're not going to start cooking tomorrow. So it's figuring out within the framework of what you are comfortable with, how do you make the healthier choices? Like I laugh, my dad, he's never going to start eating fruits and vegetables. He's in his 60s. He's a meat and potatoes Irish guy. Like it's just not going to happen. So he does have to supplement with fruits and vegetables through a supplemental form, through a vitamin, because he's not going to get them in his regular diet. So it's figuring out how to work around and get to a healthier outcome and then measure if it's working. So you might think you have a healthy diet, but it may not be working for you. So that's where diagnostics come in and doing that regular check-in every 6 to 12 months and seeing, okay, is my current diet keeping my inflammation where it needs to be? Is my metabolic health really good? Or maybe I don't process sugar well and I need to reevaluate what I'm eating. Do I have a healthy gut? Everybody's like, oh, probiotics. It's like the big kick. I'm like, well, probiotics are great if you have good bacteria and you have no bad bacteria or low amounts of bad bacteria. If it's reversed, the probiotics might be hurting more than they're helping. So it's really doing that check-in to see if what you're doing is working or it needs to be modified.
That was all so helpful. When people are told about supplements, where do you go? Because there's so many things on the market. How do you know what's a good grade of supplements? How do you know it's not? Like, where would you start? And I love that you said about the blood diet. I haven't heard about that before. So tell me more about that so I can help the viewers.
Yeah. So again, everything is what you choose to do research on. There's a lot of research around the blood type diet. We all obviously there's multiple, A positive, A minus, O's as examples. And, all of us process differently. Like I use my brother and I as a great example because we couldn't be more different. We're both healthy, but we took a very different approach. He's an O negative. He is a carnivore. They actually recommend the carnivore diet on the O negative blood type. And he processes meat amazingly. He eats predominantly meat. I haven't eaten meat in 7 years. And I don't process meat well. I don't feel good. And ironically, given my blood type, I'm an A negative. Meat's not something I'm supposed to consume regularly. So, I recommend that book because it's really interesting, but I also say listen to your body. We were all trained on the food pyramid. I was trained, it's like, oh, you need to have this much dairy, this much fat. Remember that, like, you're in school and they're like, you must eat protein. And so I had that like pre-wired in my head, and I've never had a lot of dairy. I don't process dairy well. My stomach doesn't like it, but I like forced it. I was like, oh, I've got to have a little bit of dairy today, and I've got to eat the protein. I got to get chicken in here somewhere. And then finally one day I was, I had the pleasure of watching this documentary on the plant-based diet and understanding it's less about being forced into a food pyramid and it's more about eating for your body and eating the right things for your body. And so I started listening. It was kind of trial and error. Like when I eat this, how do I feel? Do I feel good? Do I feel lethargic? Do I feel tired? Like, am I processing well? And over time, I started out actually very clean, which was not maintainable for me, doing fully plant-based to kind of transition, which was wonderful. But as a mom working full-time with three kids, it wasn't going to work for me for forever. And so I introduced back in, simple carbs and then also seafood. And I feel good. Like that's why, you just feel good. I wake up, I don't feel bloated, I'm not lethargic, I don't have brain fog. And those were all really key signs for me that this diet was effective. And so whereas Rob feels the same way and he's eating a predominantly meat-based diet. So I think we got it wrong when we tried to say, oh, everybody should be Atkins, everybody should be a carnivore, or, you need to have a high fat diet. I don't process that well. I don't really consume much fat at all, but I also don't eat really any sugar. I have simple carbs that I do eat, but I'm not eating dessert or, candy or things along those lines. Some of the best advice I can do is listen to your body. Try to find something that works for you. The simpler it is, the cleaner it is, the more effective it's likely to be. But don't feel the need to fall into the fad. Because just because it works for your best friend or your neighbor doesn't mean it's going to work for you. The same thing is true. There's a great book out by an author her name is escaping me, but it's called Fasting Like a Girl. She just did such a tremendous job explaining the differences between men and women in fasting. Because for a while there, everybody's like, oh, I'm going to fast.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I'm not going to eat my first meal until noon. And really, what she talks about in her book is men and women are different hormonally. And fasting, not eating till noon every day of the month, is actually incredibly unhealthy for a woman's body. It doesn't enable us to go through the natural cycles. It impacts our hair, our nails, how we feel, our energy levels. Like there's a reason we crave sugar right before our period. It's intentional. We need sugar before our period in order to go through that process effectively. So do your homework and look at those things, you know, understand your body and listen to our body. We've stopped doing that. And then if you're going for supplements, you're going to pay up for quality. I think the fads of, oh, Amazon has it for $6, it's probably not a good product. Like you really need to do your homework. There are a handful of brands that are very high quality. You want to look for purity. You want to understand the source. I laugh when you go to the grocery store and you're looking at food and where it's coming from. You want to know the source of your food. It's the same thing.
Love that. So you said that Alzheimer's dementia is preventable. And I know that this is probably such a hard topic for so many that are going through it, that might be caregivers right now, that might be concerned that they could be at risk. I mean, my grandfather was diagnosed officially at 69, but we started seeing symptoms. We didn't know we were seeing symptoms.
Yeah.
We started seeing things as we look back 64, 65. And then I think it was something I saw, maybe it was Dr. Amen, that said, you might be diagnosed in your 60s. And as you even said, like, but you might be dealing with it 10, even 20 years
Yeah.
prior. So that's a huge gap, Jenna. I mean, that
Mhm.
you could be having it, going through it, and not even know it. And then it shows up one day, and now your whole life is completely changed. And I took care of my grandpa the last 5 years of his life, and I understand that you and your brother took care of your mom, and it's not an easy thing to watch someone disappear in front of you. Uh,
No, I wouldn't wish it on anyone.
no, they're physically there, but they're not there, and it's heartbreaking. And it's even worse when they can't remember you. So, for those that are in the thick of it or starting to think, could this be what happens to me too? What other information, tips, takeaways could you give them to help them in this journey of navigating this?
Oh, it's such a big question because there's so many facets that go into it. To your point, they say the average is you are experiencing symptoms and the development of Alzheimer's for 18 years before diagnosis. So what you're doing now in your 30s and 40s will determine how you live in your 50s and 60s. And that's what I think a lot of people don't realize. We think we're immune. We're young. We're not thinking about what it's going to be like. I mean, think about it. When you're in your 20s, you think 40 is like ancient.
Oh, yeah.
You're like, oh, when I'm 40, I'm going to be so old. And then you turn 40 and you're like, man, I'm just getting started. I'm just figuring out life. So it's hard to imagine that you have to think about how you're going to live 15, 20 years from now with the decisions that you make today. And it's also terrifying to think about the concept of losing your mind. We can all deal with potentially getting sick or, a part of our body not performing to the best of our ability. But the idea of losing our mind, our ability to function as we do, our personality or our identity, it's terrifying. And so, I look back and I say, okay, what are the root causes? Because we want to understand our body. The only way to stave off disease is to optimize our health. So there's a lot of studies out today. And, when you think about Alzheimer's, it's likely multifaceted. It's not this one thing determined whether or not you got the disease. I look at my mother as an example. There are so many things in her health journey that were not good. And, we couldn't pinpoint to the one thing that was the contributing factor. It was a multitude of factors. My mother, if you looked at her, was healthy. She was what you would consider traditionally healthy. She had a low BMI, she was active, she was pretty. You wouldn't look at her and say, that's an unhealthy person. But there were things beneath the surface that weren't healthy. She walked around with elevated inflammation. She had heart issues. She likely had long-term untreated C. difficile. She wasn't metabolically regulated. So there was so many competing factors to determine what was the root cause. I'll never know the answer to that. I think, I had hoped I would. I hoped that we'd like have this crystal ball and be able to say, oh, that one thing, she had a stroke. She had a multitude of things that happened to her in her health journey. She had mono as a child, like you look at all of these things and you're like, okay, was it this or was it that? I don't know. Was it a multitude of things? Probably. But when I look at my health, the things that I focus on are truly like, do I have a healthy gut? Because I know I don't want C. difficile. I know I don't want to be dealing with H. pylori. I know I don't want to deal with all of these things internally that are driving the amount of bad bacteria I have in my gut. So gut health is really important to me. I'm testing my gut health and I'm testing my children's gut health every 6 months. And the reason for that too is we know through published studies that long-term poor gut health in an adolescent age is contributing to potentially development of ADHD, because you're nutrient deplete. It's also leading to autoimmune conditions as you become an adult. So there are a lot of reasons to test your gut, but Alzheimer's for me is one of them. I'm also looking at my metabolic health. My beta score, which we pioneered, which is basically the only liquid biopsy that can actually measure the rate at which your beta cells are dying, essentially identifying early development of diabetes before you're symptomatic, is something I'm looking at all the time. To give you an idea, we've done some preliminary work in Alzheimer's. We tested patients that were diagnosed with Alzheimer's, and their beta scores were the highest we've ever seen, period. So we know there's a link there. We're now studying what that link really means. But essentially, your metabolic health is crucial. They have done published studies that showed if you develop diabetes before the age of 60, your risk of developing Alzheimer's doubles. So type 3 diabetes and Alzheimer's, very interconnected. And then the third thing is inflammation. Your body's yelling at you. Something's inflamed, something's not right. Your health isn't optimized. Everything is linked. The body is smart. It's foundationally looking at those factors and then it's intervening. Depending upon where you are in the development of the disease, there's different opportunities for intervention. Obviously earlier on, you're trying to optimize those things, but as you progress and you do develop the disease, there are a ton of studies out now that are looking at non-traditional ways of dealing with Alzheimer's. I did mention we did stem cells with my mom. We did take her over the border to do that because they're not readily available here in the US. It was the most effective thing we did. There's no competition. The stem cells dramatically extended her life and her quality of life. As I mentioned, she was diagnosed at around 50. She passed away at 65. At the point of diagnosis, they said the longest lifespan they had seen somebody live was 8 years. She lived 15. So it did absolutely, in my opinion, work well. There's also a lot of really novel studies right now, not in the US, around fasting, long-term fasting though. So you're looking at like a 21-day fast medically supervised to reset your immune system. So there's some interesting things that people are looking at because frankly, traditional medicine has not moved fast enough
Mhm.
in coming up with drugs, therapeutics, things that could, be effective at halting progression of the disease. And I believe a lot of that is because they're not finding patients early enough. So, if you're 18, 20, 25 years into this disease, it's really hard to determine the effectiveness of a therapeutic or for that therapeutic to be effective because the disease is too far progressed. But if we're identifying patients earlier in the progression of the disease, which is why we really want to work on diagnostics for Alzheimer's, if you're catching somebody 7 years into their journey, there's a likelihood that you can develop therapeutics that are going to be more effective at halting disease progression because you haven't done as much damage. By the time we figured a lot of this stuff out, my mother's disease had done so much damage on her brain and on her body that we just couldn't change course.
In regards, you were talking about your kids and testing their gut health. What are you doing? Like, what are you using to test their gut health?
Yeah, so we actually have gut health tests. That was really important to me. I have a personal story on that front with my youngest daughter. When I talk about eczema, I hit home on that one. When she was younger, she developed eczema all over her whole body. I mean, everything. Her face was inflamed. I mean, you took her out in public and people stared at her because she looked unwell. And we went to, my husband and I, 8 different doctors. I'm blessed. We have means. We are in the industry. We're in healthcare. We went to allergists. We went to dermatologists, pediatricians, and it's not really their fault. The traditional approach to treating is a steroid. And we were both like, no way. We're putting a long-term steroid use on an 18-month-old. And we finally found an integrative pediatrician who said, "Hey, have you tested her gut?" And I'm almost embarrassed to say at the time, I was like, no, that didn't even cross my mind. I think we're pre-programmed eczema topical. Like you think it's the skin.
Mhm.
And we tested her gut, and it turned out she had a parasite that she likely picked up when we were on vacation in Mexico. And it had wreaked havoc on her gut. And so essentially, everything she was eating, milk, dairy, all of these things, she was having an inflammatory reaction to. I mean, so much so that in addition to the eczema, we had an EpiPen because she was getting so inflamed. We ended up treating her with an antiparasitic. It was a 6-day regimen. And then we started doing some gut healing supplements. Within a month, the eczema was gone. She has no eczema. She hasn't had it since. And, that was so eye-opening to me that I ended up going to the CEO of the company of the gut health test we use. And I said to him, I mean, your test changed our lives. Like, she likely would have developed even more health conditions had we not identified that parasite. And I said, but the challenge is, I went to 8 doctors to find this test. I didn't even know to think to use it on my child. And I am surrounded by healthcare every day. What is the mom in South Dakota doing? Where is she going? How is she accessing this technology? And so we collaborated to bring our gut health test direct to consumer, available in all states but New York right now. You can buy it off the shelf. And you can test for all known parasites, good and bad bacteria, gut lining, gut dysbiosis, all through a stool sample. And anybody at any age can take advantage of this test. So you can test your children. It's not invasive. It's poop. So everybody gets kind of grossed out. Kids are probably like, "Mom wants my poop." I'm like, well, you know what? Like that's how we're going to find out what's going on inside. And so it's really important. And I think people are waking up to that now. They're going, oh, I may have been missing this key component to understanding my health and understanding my child's health. And it's not to say that all ADHD is because there's a gut issue. Absolutely not the point I would make, but there could be aspects of that could be linked to gut health. And why not turn over that stone and make sure you rule that out as an issue?
Mhm. So they take this test from the kit that you have.
Mhm.
They take the stool. Where do they send it off to? Are they sending it to your lab? Are they sending it to a different lab?
Yep. So we try to make it as easy as possible. You'll buy it in a retail pharmacy or you'll order it online. You'll collect your sample. It's all included. You're going to ship that back to our partner Genova's lab. They're in North Carolina. So that sample will arrive within 48 hours of you shipping it. And then they culture that sample for 10 to 14 days. So it's a pretty detailed process. And then you'll get an email, you'll log on, and you can download your results. You can email your results. Most of the result reports are about 30 pages, so very detailed. And no two reports are going to ever be the same because the bacteria you might have is going to be different to the bacteria I'm going to have, as well as the percent you're going to have, both good and bad. So they're really personalized reports so you can understand what's going on in your gut and then recommendations on how to improve it.
I love that. I'll be getting links for everybody to have. I want to go back a little bit to inflammation because with this conversation, I know the one I have with your brother, everybody has some type of inflammation, whether you have in your gut, you get an injury and your knees inflamed or whatever it is. I know even with victims and survivors of violence or trauma, our gut seems to be the first thing that gets attacked and has inflammation, and I can speak to this as I'm a survivor of domestic and sexual violence. So talk more about that because I think so many people think it's just inflammation, it'll go away. Ice it, it'll go
Yeah.
away. Put heat on it, it'll go away. Like, it's not a red flag to them that anything else is going on. And I know we've kind of like talked about the inflammation, but I feel like this is a warning of our body that
Mhm.
so many people are ignoring because, oh, go away, I just need to rest this or I need to do that. But there's an underlying cause that can get much worse. And I know talking to your brother, he's like, wait, your grandpa had Alzheimer's, dementia, diabetes, heart disease, all this. He said that's all inflammation. And
Mhm.
one's kind of causing the other. And I don't want anybody else to have to go through that. Something that could be stopped and prevented, and when it's not diagnosed or when it's not being dealt with appropriately by dealing with the root cause, when we just put a
Yeah.
band-aid on it, it becomes worse. So what
Oh,
more can you share about that?
so first you have to know if you have it, which likely all of us have some low grade inflammation, but you want to understand what are your inflammation numbers? And then to your point, where is it coming from? What is causing that inflammation in your body? Because if you don't know if you have it and where it's coming from, how can you possibly treat it? And there are a multitude of ways to treat it once you know where it's coming from and what's causing it. Obviously, diet modification is a factor, but diet's not going to work for everyone. There's incredible peptides now. There's injections like glutathione and NAD. The big thing I point out there, though, is there's a lot of people out there that are promoting results with products that are just not effective or true. For you to really get the benefit of an NAD or a glutathione, it needs to be injected. Same with peptides. They're going to need to be injected in most cases. So I think it's really figuring out first what are your numbers? Where is it coming from? And then what type of intervention is going to be most effective for you given those two things that you've answered. And then finding somebody that can guide you on that journey. If it's as simple as a supplement over the counter and a diet modification, you may not need a medical professional to help guide you. But if it's more complex, it's finding the right person that is potentially going to take a more integrative or functional approach to treating that inflammation than prescribing a pill. And, what's nice is, telehealth has made it very accessible. So you can be in Nebraska and potentially be seeing a functional medicine doctor in Florida. So you're not landlocked anymore by what happens to be in your backyard, and it can be affordable. I think that the day and age where, oh, if I wanted to go to a functional medicine doctor, I had to drop $700, that is past. I haven't had a primary care doctor ever. I went from under 18 having a pediatrician to thinking I was so healthy that I went to urgent care, through my 20s when I needed it, to now I have an incredible, integrated functional medicine, practitioner. They don't live where I live. Everything is remote, but they're focused on understanding my body through really good diagnostic testing and then prescribing a regimen that's going to help me optimize my health. So, I'm not getting sick because I'm constantly hacking my health. I'm constantly saying, okay, how do I, it's the old adage of gamification. Our body is, you're gaming your body to some degree. But how can I improve a marker if I don't know what the marker is? As a woman, every woman from 35 on, at minimum, every year should test their hormones. If you're not testing your hormones, when you're 45 and starting to be perimenopausal, maybe for some younger, How are you going to know what good looks like if you don't have a baseline? How are you going to know if you're optimized? Because your hormone levels and my hormone levels are different.
Mhm.
Your good is different than my good. And the area where I think the healthcare system missed really big is they said, okay, well, everybody's the same. So good testosterone in a man is the same for Jack and Rob and John. That's not true. And it's the same is true for women, I don't want to be on the curve. I don't want to be the average.
Mhm.
I want to feel great. And we have to start asking that question and challenging the status quo where if you wake up in the morning and you don't feel good, that's a problem. If
Mhm.
you hit 3 o'clock, I had a doctor who I won't name because she made a statement that I found really frustrating. Is she said, well, if you're a woman in your 40s and your tank isn't as full and you're tired at 2 o'clock, that's normal. Not for me. It's not normal. I don't want to feel tired at 2 o'clock. Like I still have to put in another at least 8 hours. I'm not going to put in 8 hours with an empty tank. So I really hope that men, women, everybody wakes up and goes, okay, do I feel awesome? If I don't feel awesome, let's figure out why. And let's look at my baseline numbers and let's look at what optimized looks like and let's shoot to be optimized on every number
Mhm.
and continually look at those numbers and continually improve upon them because it's so important. And I think that's where we've really missed the mark is we stop testing frequently enough, especially with half the US population not having a primary care doctor. How are they accessing testing?
Yeah.
The only way they're going to do that is through online or retail pharmacy because they don't have another means to go in there and get access to that test.
Okay, you mentioned about testing for inflammation. How do you test that? Is that the gut health testing or is it a different test?
So there's a lot of inflammatory biomarkers. We cover inflammation in two of our tests, and we're actually working on a third test that will be fully just focused on inflammation. We have a test in our portfolio called the Optimal Health Test. The rationale for the Optimal Health Test is I call it like your annual physical in a box. It tests the entry biomarkers for all key areas. So, heart health, inflammation, metabolic health. It's going to give you a quick read on the 8 most important annual biomarkers that you need to look at. And you're going to see, okay, pretty quickly, are there anywhere I'm really off? Is there anything that looks concerning? And then you dig into that area specifically to understand what's going on there. But if you're just looking for, okay, how do I find out what's going on with my health in general? The optimal health test is great. And we have another kind of gateway product called the sleep and stress test, which is looking at cortisol, DHEA, and the ratio. So it's your entry hormone test to give you a baseline of where you sit and to understand if you need to dig a little deeper.
You said it goes over 8 different markers.
So those 8 different markers, you're going to get CRP, insulin resistance, cholesterol, full cholesterol profile, lipids, HbA1c, GGT, glucose, and visceral fat. So kind of it's the comprehensive, if you went to a good primary care doctor and said, hey, I want to just do a full annual panel, those are the first ones that professional would likely recommend. And then if you're seeing elevated, as an example, CRP, okay, well, let's figure out why your inflammation marker is off. Let's dig a little bit deeper. But if you only want to take one test, if you don't have a risk for diabetes, if you have a risk for diabetes, I recommend our diabetes test. If you don't, the optimal health test and the gut health test are going to cover kind of your basics to get you started.
And about how much are each test?
Yeah. So you can go onto our website. Our optimal health test is 179. So, the point I make there, it's also HSA and FSA eligible. So you can use those dollars on that. And then, our gut health tests, we have two versions of our basic version and our advanced version. The biggest difference there is our advanced version test for all known parasites. The basic version does not. The advanced version is more expensive. So the advanced version is 250, whereas the basics version is 199.
That sounds, I mean, pretty doable, especially with FSA, HSA being able to cover it. I mean,
Yeah.
that's a great benefit because there's a lot of things that aren't covered.
Well, and I think the thing there, I tell people is with where healthcare is going now with high deductibles, high copays, If you were likely to go to a primary care doctor, get, any type of insurance coverage or script to get blood work done, then go to LabCorp or Quest and then pay your copays there. Before you know it, you're likely at over $100, maybe more if you have to meet your deductible. You may end up paying more out of pocket going that path than you would just by buying the test.
Yeah, so true. And those deductibles can be so, so high. Any final tips or takeaways that you like to leave our viewers with?
Final tips or takeaways. I guess final takeaway would just be, to remember we're all in the driver's seat of our own health and don't stop digging. Even when we feel frustrated or we're not getting to where we need to be, just keep asking questions because you will find the solution if you keep asking questions and better understanding your body. And, tip of the day is keep moving. You've got to keep moving forward. You've got to get up. I laugh. I'm a gadget girl, so I need to have my Apple Watch to yell at me, like stand up or move around, and you can see I'm competitive, the gamification element of I've got to get my steps in. But find a form of movement that resonates with you, whether that's gym or yoga or bar or hit or pickleball or basketball. Don't feel the need to conform. If it will get you going, then just go that route because the most important thing is that you're moving your body.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Jenna. It has been a pleasure having you on this episode. I've learned so much. I'm sure the viewers will learn a lot as well. And I just want to again say that this episode was dedicated to your mother, Prudence, and my grandpa, Papa, both victims of Alzheimer's and dementia. And the reason I had Jenna on was she has so much knowledge and hoping that what she has to share will help you in preventing Alzheimer's and dementia and help you if you're currently going through a terrible, awful, evil disease and it's hard to watch a loved one go through it. So, thank you again. And I will be posting links in regards to what we talked about. And I just want to remind my viewers to live each day with purpose, making a difference one day, one life at a time.